Right, so as you might guess by the distant music and the occasional firework, it is actually Christmas night. I did miss the planting for Yuletide or Christmas Eve because we were out for a meal and then we were back quite late, and I was very full. I'm only slightly less full now, but we are going to be doing 2 nights plantings as a result. So we're going to be starting with Christmas Eve's planting, and that is going to be one that I think would have been quite refreshing after overeating, which is the Bridelia or Lemon-Meringue Pie fruit, which is Rollinia deliciosa, probably more accurately called Annona mucosa, but Rollinia sounds nicer, so we'll be going with that. So this is going in the area where there is a Carpentaria acuminata, which seems to have died. Most of the others are perking up nicely, even the ones the chickens have given a good kicking, putting out some growth. This one dropped its leading leaf, so I think it's actually died, even though the base seems quite alive. There is a possible explanation for that in some of the companion plants here, because the Sansevieria trifasciata, which I will be replanting, the sort of root part has been eaten off, so they're re-rooting from the leaves themselves, which the species is very good at. It's one of the reasons I quite like it as a shade ground cover, because the mole rats can eat it and it can grow straight back wherever it touches the ground, which not all the Sansevieras do nearly so readily. Most of them can root that way, but not so quickly. But this is also going to be getting a couple of things to try and discourage mole rats in case their tunneling around here has been what's upsetting the Carpentaria. So we're going to be putting in some dietes. I think it's Iridoides, but it might be Grandiflora. Iridoides is native, and this is growing feral around here, but I'm not sure if it is actually some Grandiflora that has escaped from captivity, because that's a very popular garden plant here, including one that my grandmother planted. So then we're going to be also adding in some Euphorbia tithymaloides, which is definitely not native, which is an American succulent euphorbia. It's very toxic, as are most euphorbias, and it's a good one to bury in the ground where it can form a barrier to the mole rats, and also it will hopefully, spread out, mark this out, and also give it a little bit of shade when it's coming up and a little bit tender. Part 2, which is tonight's planting, once I have stripped the leaves off a very large piece of Dracaena, which is going to be going in as a marker here, I'm going to be planting a Christmas tree. Now, you can take that in 2 ways. I'm going to be starting with a Cupressus macrocarpa, which I think actually might have a different name, which is one of these cypresses. It's the Monterey cypress, which is from California. This is a very weird cypress because it thrives in a very different environment to its home environment, but can really struggle in some other environments. But up here, it's very hardy, and it is, like most conifers, very evergreen, so it's quite a good one to have in places where I have a lot of deciduous trees. And this is an area where I've planted lychees, where I've planted a few other things that got very sunburned, and a couple of them got lost because all the trees around are acacias and ipe, and they just drop all their leaves, and then suddenly there's this massive amount of sunlight hitting the ground where things have been quite well shaded. So I wanted something with a more consistent shade, and this does respond very well to pruning, at least in this environment. I know in some environments it can be a lot fussier, so hopefully this will work well for that. This is actually what we used to use as a Christmas tree here. It's not the standard Christmas tree as far as I know in Europe and the West, but it is what we'd used because we have a line of them growing along the front as a windbreak along the north side of the property, and we used to go out when we were little and choose one, and my father would cut the top off and that would come inside as a Christmas tree and would re-sprout the next year. With that, we're going to be putting what we currently use as a Christmas tree, which is Agave siciliana. Agaves are generally more frustrating than the Ficreas, which are very similar looking, because they tend to sucker quite vigorously, which the Ficreas don't do so much. Of the sort of typical agaves we have, which is to say the agaves that are not Agave attenuata or the small ornamental ones, the least frustrating is this one, which is Agave siciliana, because it tends to have only got a spine at the very tip of its leaf, which is very much like the Ficrea fetida, but unlike the Ficrea fetida, this has a small and compact flowering head, which makes a very good Christmas tree, whereas the Ficrea's flower head tends to be very broad and sprawling, so even when that dries out, although it's very ornamental when it's in flower, it's not ideal for hanging ornaments on, whereas this is very compact and very good for that. So that is what we use year after year, a dried one of those. We're also going to be putting in some Calico just to protect the little cypress from the attentions of the chickens and the spurfowl at this time of year, because bare soil is very interesting to them currently, and this isn't right in their usual territory, but I have been scything around here, so they will come and investigate, so it will be good if there was some reason they didn't sit on this. So that should be everything for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it, and if you haven't enjoyed it, thank you for watching anyway. Please tune in again tomorrow, because we'll be planting something different. I'm not sure what yet, but we'll see. So this dopey little creature is a citrus swallowtail. It's a very large butterfly. It's Papillia demodocus. It is a native butterfly, which is a little odd because we don't actually have any native citruses. It is common more or less throughout Zambia, and I think where there's no citrus, it just feeds on its natural host, which are other members of the rue family, Rutaceae. So we do have a few Xanthoxylon species native in Zambia, and I believe this feeds on those, and there's a few others in the same family as well. And then, yeah, it switches over pretty easily to their relatives when you have gardens and planted citrus everywhere. They don't tend to do too much damage as a caterpillar. They tend to eat a lot of mature growth because they're well adapted to the family's toxins, and so they just tend to stimulate new growth. On a very small plant, a lot of them can be a problem, but generally speaking, most plants that aren't already unhealthy will recover very well and sometimes actually get a boost from the caterpillars of these, unlike some other caterpillars.